For the benefit of those watching a recording of this interview, my name's Josh O'Neill and I'm the editor of Education Investor Global. I'm joined today by Paul Howarth, Chief Executive of Times Higher Education, or THE as they're more commonly known now, Mehdi Basiri, Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of ApplyBoard, and Jo Johnson, Chairman of International at ApplyBoard and a former British Minister of State for University Science, Research and Innovation. So we've got a limited amount of time today, I think around half an hour to 40 minutes, during which we're going to begin by talking about THE's new partnership with ApplyBoard, and then spark a dialogue around the wider international student market and some of the myriad challenges facing universities across the world at present. We'll also talk a bit about the strategies of both THE and ApplyBoard, as I know this will be something our viewers and readers will be interested to hear about. So without further ado, Paul, I'd like to come to you first. And we're having this conversation today on the back of THE's newly formed partnership with ApplyBoard. So perhaps you could set the scene for us by setting out the headline terms of the agreement and why it's advantageous for both parties.
Yes, very happy to do that. So for a long time, THE, with our rankings, has attracted a very significant student audience. It's an audience that historically we've done nothing to, we've not marketed to them, and we felt for a long time that we can actually do something. And so we're in the process of setting up a student business, which will be called THE Student. And our plan there effectively is to work with the absolute best partners on a global basis and to refer students to those partners, whether or not it's to place students in institutions, identify student financing or accommodation or other ancillary services. And obviously ApplyBoard is absolutely fantastic and world-class. We've had a wonderful relationship to date and very excited to sign up and refer students. In fact, we've just had our first joint student event today, which was a tremendous success with students from over 100 countries attending. And for me, that's a sign of a strong partnership.
Thanks, Paul. And Jo, if I could come to you next. Now you're on the board of several education companies. I think most recently you were installed as chair of Access Creative College here in the UK, where I am, following its takeover by Apiary Capital. So tell us what excites you in particular about ApplyBoard and what makes it stand out from competitors, comparable companies, in particular in the context of the Canadian market.
Well, for me, what I'm excited about is working with a company that's doing so much to lower barriers to access for higher education around the world. It's very difficult if you're a student in a country to make that journey to study in Canada or in the UK or in the US. The barriers appear formidable. And for me, someone who's always championed international higher education in my various ministerial roles and who personally benefited from the opportunities to study overseas, it was the chance to work with ApplyBoard to help if we can lower those barriers to access to education for people who are going to benefit from it all over the world. It's a really exciting company, ApplyBoard. No one else is doing anything quite like it in terms of offering an end-to-end seamless digital journey. And for me, it's a very, very powerful proposition that's going to really transform the whole international education market.
Okay, thank you, Jo. And Mehdi, last but not least, I'll come to you now that you've had a stellar review or testament from your newfound colleagues, and indeed a ringing endorsement. So perhaps for the uninitiated, first of all, could you tell us exactly what Apply does, talk to us about its origins, and then give us the elevator pitch for the company, explain why its new partnership with THE is significant.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Josh, for having us. Great seeing you, Paul and Jo. So pretty much what ApplyBoard does, it's the simple way on explaining it. Imagine you want to travel, you use Expedia or use Expedia for traveling. But there is not such a simpler end-to-end application system for international students. That's what ApplyBoard does. From the moment that you're planning to go abroad, till the moment that you landed in the country, we will support you through the journey. As Jo mentioned, is all through our online platform. But there is a significant tech involved that matches you with the right school, matches you with the right program. It gives you the best opportunity and options that is ahead of you to make sure you will become successful. And as Jo mentioned, the study journey is not simple. we've been through it 10 years back. It's extremely time consuming. It could be extremely costly for people if they don't have all the knowledge in front of them. And that's what really we are about. And we want to make sure every single students around the world have this accessibility of education. That is extremely important for us. We don't want to live in the world that the students in some countries just simply can't go abroad because they don't know how to go, or it's just too expensive. We want to make sure we're breaking those walls. In terms of the partnerships with THE, why we're so excited, because first, leadership is amazing. You don't find many companies that their heart comes for the student. And that's what we more need in this market. People that they're caring about the students and putting the students first. And that's the first thing that really attracted us to THE. Second piece was that, as Paul mentioned, there is a lot of students using currently THE's website for finding what is the best for them and what is the best schools in terms of going abroad. Then what's next? We want to make sure that bridge is there for the students. Now you get to know you're going to go to University of Waterloo, then don't worry about it. This is the journey ahead of you, rather than giving them the students the light that, hey, University of Waterloo is what you need, but then leave the lights off for them that they can know what's next. And that's why this partnership is so exciting. We would be able to work together, help their students from the time that they're looking for the best schools in THE website till the time that they get landed in that country. Together, we will make sure that's a simplified process for them.
For our commercially orientated listeners, watchers, and readers, Mehdi, how does the business model work? How do you monetize it?
The interesting question, we wouldn't usually go loud. So it's schools, it's every single schools in North America, UK, Australia, they need more international students. There is massive benefit of international students coming to the country. And definitely we have different way of monetizing our whole journey. At this moment, we're more of the platform. We want to make sure that journey for the students is there. But obviously, during this journey, there are multiple ways that you can make money. But general standpoint of schools, in order to get the right students from different nationalities, they're willing to pay you a fee to get the best of students. And then if you can deliver and you can support the students through that journey, you can make them money. That's how comfortable I would say. There are obviously other ways that you can monetize this, but at this point for ApplyBoard, the most important things, we want to make sure we help as many as students possible, because we truly believe this is a good cause. And if you can be the platform that support the students, money is the next things that you need to be worried about.
Thanks, Mehdi. And lots more to come later in the conversation, I'm sure, about the important role that international students play in the ecosystem. But before we come on to that, Paul, I'd like to come back to you, if I may. So it's been 18 months since THE was separated from its one sister company, TES Global, after you were acquired by Inflection Private Equity from TPG Capital. And meanwhile, the global higher education market has, of course, been rocked by the pandemic less than a year after you joined the business. I mean, talk about a baptism of fire. Could you tell us about what's changed at THE within this period, strategically speaking, and how the company has adapted to the coronavirus era and the challenges it presents?
Yes, you're quite right to say that it has been a challenging year for both THE and also for the broader world of higher education. Our strategy hasn't changed fundamentally, in as much as Inflection invested in the business because it has such a strong authoritative brand. It's one of the few brands that enables me to pick up the phone and talk to pretty much any vice chancellor in any university. And we talk with the voice of authority and trust, which I think is incredibly important, particularly in a time of such disruption as we have at the moment. And Inflection really likes our core content, the business itself, which is 50 years old. The rankings, I think, differentiate because of the methodology that's used. And based on that, we started to create some really interesting data products, but also to innovate in the world of, if you look at, in the last year or so, we've launched Sustainable Development Goal ranking, looking at the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals and measuring universities against new areas that move beyond pure research or pure reputation. And I think that demonstrates very much an innovation approach from THE. And I think moving forward, the immediate challenge has been physical events and how we respond as a business to providing networking in a virtual space. And I think we've responded intelligently there. And what has been particularly attractive, again, as Ed demonstrated today, working with ApplyBoard, is the sheer scale of a virtual event in terms of the number of countries and the number of participants that can be reached. And I guess from my perspective, running commercial business, it's how you then monetize that ultimately, and how you look from a sponsorship perspective, because people do value virtual events differently to how they value physical events. And it's really the networking component that we need to work on from a virtual perspective. But I think moving forwards with Inflection, it's do as we do, continue, mitigate against the long tail that is COVID, and look at potential acquisitions about how we can grow our business. And Inflection are an absolute ideal partner to work. And in fact, I'm working on a number of current investments at the moment, which is really very exciting.
Very exciting indeed, and perhaps we can come on to those in a bit more detail later. I'd just like to pick up on something, Paul. This little black book of vice chancellor contacts that you have. What's coming up in those? What kind of things are coming up in the conversations when you're talking to vice chancellors across the UK and indeed across the world?
Well, immediately, certainly in the last 4 weeks, is whether or not students would turn up. Registration numbers have looked positive for quite some time, but it's whether or not the students would actually turn up on the campus. And I've been having meetings with vice chancellors in the UK over the last few weeks, and I'm very pleased to say that student numbers do seem to be robust and do actually seem to have grown based even on 2019 numbers. But obviously the challenge, and it's a worldwide challenge, is the long-term impact of COVID. And we are seeing isolated cases, and certainly in UK universities where there are some outbreaks of COVID, and it's about how they're managed on a local level. Obviously, it's the long-term impact. We're seeing challenges and a now tiered system of dealing with COVID in the UK, and that's not unique to the UK market at all. It's truly global. And really, it's about innovation, it's about growth in a longer term, it's understanding how to expand and look at new subject areas. But at the moment, the focus really is on managing the outfall from the COVID-19 issue. Okay.
And Jo, let's come back to you. I think Paul's touched on some of the pertinent pain points that universities are feeling at the moment, or we're worried about, particularly over the course of the summer. And given that you're, of course, a former British Universities Minister, I'd like to get your stock take on the UK market at present. I mean, throughout the crisis, we've seen and heard countless warnings of bankruptcies, catastrophic job losses, swinging cutbacks as a result of a downturn in international students in particular. First, now that the semester is underway, is the damage as bad as you anticipated?
Well, as Paul just said, we're waiting to see how many international students actually turn up on campus and enroll and commence their courses, and that's still to be seen. I think in an optimistic scenario, we will still see even in an optimistic scenario, we will still see a decline year on year in terms of the numbers who actually enroll. The question is, how big is that decline? My guess is it's going to be between 25 and 40%, I would say, year on year in international students. Obviously, applications were very high even during the coronavirus crisis period, which is a testament to the quality and enduring appeal of UK higher education. But circumstances have kind of conspired against the sector and continued to in recent weeks with the re-emergence of the virus across the UK. And that will, I'm sure, have had a deterrent effect on students considering their travel plans. But we won't know for sure until the end of this month, or indeed the beginning of November. So we can't give a definitive picture. I don't expect there to be disorderly failures of any UK higher education institution. Our system won't allow that. We have plans in place by regulation to protect students' interests. Every university must have a student protection plan so that a university or a college can teach out students if they're running into difficulties, or see them transferred to other institutions through articulation agreements. I do not expect to see a disorderly failure that would see students sort of cast out onto the street. That's simply not going to happen.
So quite a significant forecast from you there, 25 to 40% perhaps drop in enrollment of international students. I mean, with that,
see. I mean, it's my prediction is you know as useful as anybody else's, but you know we won't know until the end of the month. I do expect there to be a decline. It could be as much as 40%. I obviously hope it isn't, but I do expect there to be a net decline. Yeah.
And could you tell us what you think that means then as a whole for financially, for universities financially speaking? And then if I could just tag
they've benefited from a very strong enrollment of the domestic UK population. We've seen spectacular increase in participation on the domestic front this year, a 2.5 percentage point increase in the enrollment rate of 18-year-olds to record levels. And that will, to some extent, take some of the pain away from what I still anticipate to be a decline on the international side. Obviously, as we all know, international students are particularly valuable in lots and lots of ways, but they are valuable financially to our higher education institutions as well. And an increase in domestic students doesn't totally compensate for the lost income on the international side. But certainly the really strong enrollment on the domestic side is going to help a lot.
And with that in mind, although it may offset some of the pain, as you said, do you think enough's been done by the government? Has enough been done to support the sector, both financially and in terms of foreign and domestic students, a sector that many say was already under significant financial strain prior to COVID-19?
Well, on the international side, this government has got a really strong set of policies to support international enrollment. It's been as flexible as Canada in terms of enabling students to continue studying virtually where they can't physically get to the country and not lose any of their entitlements in terms of post-study work rights, for example. It's been very flexible in a number of ways in terms of helping universities manage the fact that visa processing centers and language centers have been closed, allowing universities much greater autonomy and responsibility over those sorts of aspects of the enrollment process. So I'm pretty impressed by what it's done. It's also continued to strengthen our post-study work offer, which is so important to the UK's ability to attract students, particularly from South Asia, such a strong part of the market. Recently, as you will have seen, increasing the period of post-study work to 3 years if you're a doctor, if you're pursuing postgrad studies in the UK, and that is really a world-class offer and definitely a continuing move in the right direction on that front.
I know you've got quite strong views on that particular point, Joe, and I'd like to come back to them later in the conversation. But Mehdi, perhaps we could just come back to you first. So of course, you and your company ApplyBoard are very much at the coalface of international student recruitment. Now, we've talked about some of the operational and the financial pains being felt by universities, but perhaps you could characterize for us the feelings and the concerns of overseas students at the moment, and why higher education institutions across the world need to be paying attention to them.
For sure, Josh. I think one thing that I would mention that not many people focus in it, they're focused a lot more on institution losing money, but not many people talk about what about the students not taking the experience and they have to start online. What is it in there for that? Then a lot of the school says, hey, you don't pay insurance fee, accessory fee, X, Y, Z, $1,500 off, right? Or $2,000 off or pound. But realistically, I think like if you put the students first, is that enough? Does the student deserve to get some more for say scholarship or discounts because they're not getting the experience of sitting in class? We need to keep in mind international students not all speak English as a first language. Indeed, myself, I didn't know any English before I came to Canada. So I think that face-to-face interaction with other students is really valuable for many a student. So I think like that's something that unfortunately is a massive question mark. Those people that they were kind of on the edge, I think with more clarity about governments like UK, Canada, they started online. We saw significant numbers starting online, their programs online this fall compared to the last summer. Summer was very early, so not many people could have adopted as fast. But still, there is a good number of the students that they're like, why do I have to study online when there's no incentive for me to do so? Or maybe this pandemic goes another year. Am I going to finish, for example, my master's online and never even get a step to that country? There are concerns. And I think those are the things that we need to be planning for the worst and communicating, here's the worst things that can happen, and here's our plan. Here's the best thing that can happen, and here's our plan. I think as students deserve to know what is ahead of them. And unfortunately, it's a very unpleasant time, and COVID has brought a lot of uncertainty for us. But I think like with knowing and being in it for 8 months, we can get a better anticipation to our students and telling them what's going to be next. And at the end, international students is a massive, at least for Canada, $22 billion industry is not a small amount. So we need to always make sure that building the brand and reputation in front of the student, it is the best time to do it now, and see as a government, as a schools, what can be done to support the students and help them through that journey, because at the end, they're the end customers for us.
And Paul, before I come on to my next specific question for you, just quickly in response to some of Mehdi's comments there, in your opinion, are universities doing enough to ease these concerns among students and international students?
Well, as the father of a son who is applying for university next year, I'm certainly very engaged in terms of that experiential bit. I certainly know best 3 years of my life was spent at university, and I think it's very challenging to think what that might have been like had it been entirely online. And I think universities are doing their absolute best. There's a real shift towards a blended and an online learning. And everyone I've spoken to, all the VCs I've spoken to, absolutely recognize the importance of the network and the physical experience of actually being on campus. Having said that, the options that are available to students, obviously the number of jobs available is low, the opportunity to travel is low. And so I understand why there's been a big push, certainly on the domestic side in the UK, because there aren't very many options open to people in their teens and in their early 20s, other than progressing their education. And so from my view, I do think universities are doing an awful lot. My wife's a senior lecturer at a UK university, and I can only tell you the amount of work that's gone into that particular institution to prepare both for domestic and also international students. So yes, but to Mehdi's point, the experience is diminished, but I think the absolute utmost is being done to try and respond as well as they can do, given the compromises that have to be made as a result of the virus.
I think that's the key term there, isn't it? Compromise. I mean, look at us. We're sat here on Zoom in all different parts of the world. As you were saying, you had challenges about running events, as of we at Education Investor Global. So we're all having to make do and adjust, aren't we? So Paul, I'd just like to come back again to THE's strategy. And you mentioned earlier in some earlier comments about the importance of data to you. Now, at the time of the carve-out in April last year, THE communicated clearly its intentions to become a data-driven company. So first, perhaps could you just quickly set out the roadmap to becoming a data-driven company within the higher education sector? And second, why is data now the most valuable commodity to THE, which was historically a content-led business?
Yes, I think content will remain important to us, and really the shift within the business is moving from really a UK-focused content play that covers the UK market to an international business, to a business covering the international world of higher education. But our rankings are some of the best recognized rankings globally, and in order to produce those rankings, we have for some time collected a very significant amount of data. In fact, we have well over 10 million data points now within the business. And sitting on that, we recognized that universities want to understand their position vis-a-vis the rankings and how they fit with regard to their competitors. And so we responded effectively to a market need by producing our various data products, Data Points, Impact Plus, and Reputation Plus. And the uptake has been very significant. So effectively, we responded to a market need. And we see that growing. And what's particularly exciting for us in launching a student business is collecting the student data that goes alongside the innovation, the impact, the reputation, and the teaching data we've been collecting. So it's really effectively a fourth dimension. And we believe that in combination will produce a very powerful data set, which universities will be able to identify and understand their effectiveness of their research, the effectiveness of their student recruitment, and outcomes and reputation. And that effectively drives our journey. So whatever we do, data will form the absolute foundation of whatever our evolution is moving forwards. So that's the reason behind it.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. And if I could just pick up on the student data in particular. Now, THE's main competitor in the ranking space is QS, with which I believe THE was once partners, in the sense that QS provided the data on which your rankings were compiled, while THE had the brand, the outlets, the distribution channels. Now, QS focused on students and has built a £40 million revenue business, while THE until very recently focused entirely on academics and institutions. Has the company any regrets about not pursuing student-driven income until very recently?
I think QS has done a fantastic job. I hold them in high regard. Do we have regrets? I don't have regrets. It's the reason I joined the business, because I feel that it's all about opportunity. And so, yes, I think now is the time that we address the student audience that we have. I think we have a brand that resonates truly globally, which does separate us, I think, from a number of other organizations. And it's the reasons why we're partnering with ApplyBoard. They're the absolute best at what they do within their respective markets. And I feel a partnership just adds to our strength. The sum is greater than the individual components. And so we will grow, and I think it will be quite an exciting journey over the next few years.
Is there any risk to damaging relations with your higher education partners by looking to monetize students and student traffic in any way?
I don't think so. I know historically we've held off from doing that, but I've now spoken to a large number of VCs across a lot of countries, and they feel as long as we maintain the authority and the focus on quality that we have done in the academic space, which is why we're only working with select partners, then they're actually very excited about us moving into the student space. And so I don't believe for a moment that we will damage. I think it'll enhance the brand.
And Joe, if I could just come back to you again. Now, throughout the conversation, I think all of you have touched on the important role that international students play, both not only financially, but of course to creating a diverse environment at UK universities and elsewhere in the world. I mean, to some industry observers, though, and indeed many outside the industry, I think the coronavirus crisis has in some ways shone a somewhat uncomfortable light on some universities' over-reliance on foreign students, notably those from China, who, of course, at some institutions here in the UK comprise as much as a quarter of all enrolments. Now, critics might argue that this phenomenon poses significant financial risks and is a negative byproduct of the UK's market-based higher education system, one that's, of course, mirrored in the US, Canada, and Australia. Do you share such concerns at all about universities' dependency on overseas income? Should there be limits, perhaps, imposed on foreign enrolments, or would that be a step too far? Sorry, Joe, I think you're still on mute.
No, yeah, I was saying one of the great policy developments of the last 24 months has been a strong consensus in the UK that we don't want to have number controls on international students, and that we want to allow our universities to benefit from everything that they bring in terms of diversity of the learning environment, many different and valuable perspectives on the challenges that we face as a country, and of course, you know, the income that they bring to our universities that plays such an important role in supporting our research activities undertaken in our universities. So there is a strong recognition that international students are a net positive, and that we should, far from setting controls on them, actually aspire to increase our market share as a country. And I was very pleased that the revised international education strategy, when it was published in May 2019, set a target of 600,000 international students in the UK and a value of education exports for the UK of £35 billion by 2030. Now, it's great to have targets, and it's great that they represent an expectation of growth for the sector, Personally, I would have wanted those targets to be even more ambitious, but absolutely not moving back to number controls. I do think that would be a step backwards. Now, you do raise an interesting point about the makeup and mix of the international student body, and whether students from one particular country have an excessive share or dominate a group. And I do think all vice chancellors want to have a diverse learning environment, and that does mean that diversification strategies are really important. And that's where the partnership between Times Higher and ApplyBoard is actually really useful, because it enables students from all over the world to be accessed, to have an easier journey into higher education in the UK than they might otherwise do, one which presents them with fewer barriers. And that will make it a lot easier for our higher education institutions to reach into markets which sometimes can appear quite hard for them to access. So I do think this partnership, which we're celebrating today, is going to be a really important way in which the sector addresses this issue of over-reliance on students from a particular geographical area.
But on the flip side, I suppose the counter argument to your points, Joe, and they're all totally valid points. But I think what's been pointed out throughout the pandemic is that if there is a dip in international enrollments, this has financial repercussions. At some institutions, these are very significant financial repercussions. So are these concerns simply unfounded in your opinion, or?
Well, of course, if there's a shortfall of income from any source, it's going to lead to a deficit. That doesn't mean that you want to cease to have the possibility of income from that particular source. It just means, we've got a challenge to make up in terms of university finances for this coming year, and perhaps next year as well, if numbers don't recover. Universities are all making adjustments to their cost bases and to their activities to reflect what they're predicting to be, in terms of the decline of income on the international side. That doesn't mean that they don't want growth to resume in future years. The benefits to universities, to the country, to our soft power as a nation are tremendous. You don't need me to explain, but the benefits that they take back with them are substantial. They come and study in the UK, they understand our worldview, they take home with them friendships that later turn into trade ties, cultural bonds, investment, that pay dividends to the UK for years and years to come.
And very quickly, Joe, before I come back to Mehdi, perhaps I could just get your views on Brexit. Now, I know you've in the past voiced very strong views on the subject. I think it ultimately played somewhat of a role in your resignation from the British government. And given the hampered progress of negotiations at the moment, or what seemingly hampered negotiations if you read the newspapers, what do you think the future holds for European university students looking at the UK?
Well, numbers applying this year were down, I think, 7% or so, that order of magnitude. So, it wasn't a very sharp fall off. Obviously, next year is going to be more interesting when they no longer have access to home fee status, and therefore, and also the student loan book, which enables them to have a government loan that's non-recourse to them after 30 years. And there's a range of estimates as to the likely decline in EU student numbers. I think HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute, put out a forecast or a prediction of something in the order of 50% decline in EU student numbers, and that's quite possible. I'm not pessimistic about it. I'm optimistic about our institution's ability to compete on a level playing field in the EU without the benefit of the loan book to support them. I think there are strong brands in UK higher education which will be able to continue to attract significant numbers of EU students, just as they attract significant numbers of international students from around the world without the advantage of having a subsidized loan book to put into bat for them. So I do think we've got strong brands in UK higher education, and we'll continue to compete well in the EU in years ahead, even if maybe not exactly the same numbers as we have been doing up until now.
Thank you, Joe. Now, I'm conscious that we're starting to very quickly run out of time. Before we do, though, Mehdi, I'd like to just come to you before I'll ask you each for a final few thoughts in my closing question. But Mehdi, I mean, we can't have this conversation today without talking about the blockbuster year that ApplyBoard's had so far. I mean, last month, the firm that you co-founded was granted unicorn status after raising 55 million in a Series C round at a $1.4 billion valuation. First, on a human level, how does it feel to have accomplished so much in just 5 years? And perhaps you could walk us through some of the trials and tribulations of building a billion-dollar education platform, what the next step in your journey is, and how you plan to spend all of this fresh capital.
Thanks, Josh. To just clarify, it was over $120 million because we done our Series C in 2 section. It was.
My apologies.
No worries. Just saying it. It was in March, and then we did the extension. So, answers to your question. Feeling humbled. I think more than anything, me and my brother started the company for the sake of the money. It was always to our heart that how can we help the students and how can we help others. I always, whenever I get chance, I say my life changed being international students, being in Canada. So I want to make sure that I'm part of millions of other people's life. And that's the first priority for us. So I think it's a good achievement for the team and the company, and it definitely can put us in a better path in order to grow our company and put ourselves set up for ourselves for success in future. But definitely also the fund allows us to grow, right? We were very, at least in the community that we were one of the only that actually went hire 100+ people during the pandemic. And we are investing for the future. We're not thinking a 220 or 221. We're continue gonna invest in the future. And we truly believe that massive market education industry is a significant market in any country that you name it. We need many companies in this sector to make the process both for domestic and international students easier. So we're very positive, and we're very hoping that we can encourage other entrepreneurs and other companies to solve many issues that exist, and hopefully they can say it. Unfortunately, not many education company existed till today that they were over at the unicorn status. So always education was underlooked, for say. So we're very humbled and pleased that more entrepreneurs gonna take a look at this industry and say, you know what, where is it that there is a big problem? And my message to anyone is, if there is a problem, you come up with a good solution with the hard work, it pays off.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on what you've accomplished so far, and I wish you all the best for the future. As I said, we're about to run out of time, I think. We're approaching 40 minutes. So Paul, if I could just come back to you. Now, you touched on, very, very quickly before I ask the final question to each of you, you touched on acquisitions earlier in the conversation. Could you just give us an idea about the role acquisitions are going to play in THE's strategy going forward?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily unique to THE, but for us, we are looking at businesses that either accelerate our particular plans, whether or not it's in our traditional academic space, or helps us launch THE students more quickly and more effectively, or takes us into either new areas, either from a product and service perspective, or into new geographies. And so those are predominantly the areas which we'd focus on. And as I say, we have a number of potential opportunities at various different stages. And for me, that's what I'm particularly enjoying working with Inflection on, because they seem to be very open-minded in terms of accelerating our plans. And that's really all you can ask from an institutional investor.
Can we expect any this year, do you think?
I wouldn't say no, but I wouldn't say yes either. So acquisitions have generally a life of their own. And once you start predicting a time, that's when they stop happening. So possibly, let's see.
Yeah, don't I know it, but always looking for a news line. So Paul, perhaps I can have a final thought from you and indeed the other panelists to conclude the session. Now, could you give us your views on what the next 12 months hold for universities across the world and their students, perhaps for balance, striking notes of both optimism and caution? I know it's a very wide-ranging question, so take it as you wish. And if we could start with you, and then perhaps come on to Joe, and then finish with Mehdi.
So for me, and having spoken to VCs, it's really a lot about the virus and to see how long it extends. Obviously, within the Northern Hemisphere, we're about to enter winter, and the allied challenges of influenza and other associated issues which may exacerbate the problem and have a knock-on impact. And looking at how governments are responding in the UK, we've just announced there might well be a sort of a 2-week curfew prior to Christmas, which will enable people to go back and enjoy Christmas. And that's going to be mirrored around the world. And if infections increase, then I think that will be the core challenge moving forwards from my perspective. I think from an optimistic point of view, the rapid adoption of blended and online learning is making universities think in a novel and innovative approach in terms of how they deliver learning. And I certainly know that certain students, again, using my wife as an example, enjoy a blended learning approach. And I think that has made people think in a novel way, and the long-term impact of that, I think, will be positive in terms of how people do their learning. And I think that will have a long-term, if not permanent, impact.
Thanks, Paul. And Joe, reasons to be both optimistic and cautious over the next 12 to 18 months?
Joe,
I think you're on mute, Joe.
The sector's going to need levels of leadership of an extraordinary caliber over the coming 12 months. I mean, we're asking our senior teams in our universities to manage a short-term crisis and create new forms of provision at speed, at the same time as we're asking them to prepare for some fairly significant structural changes that are going to play out over the next 3 to 5 years in the form of the whole disaggregation of the higher education proposition. We're going to see more flexible learning, more modular funding, more opportunities for students to accumulate and transfer credit from one institution to another, and a breaking down of the barriers between further education and higher education. These are some big changes which are coming down the line for all our higher education institutions. And vice chancellors are going to have to compartmentalize their work in a complicated way to manage both the short-term crisis and these longer-term changes that are coming at the same time.
Undoubtedly very, very full plates in terms of vice chancellors. And Mehdi, the final word from you.
I'll end it with a positive. I actually think we're going to come as a sector much stronger post-pandemic. These all short-term, and the great thing is it's not one nation, it's the whole world in it together. So I think like it's going to be better for students post-pandemic. I think we going to see a lot more affordability around education, more accessibility. As Paul said, many a student that they didn't have the opportunity to travel or couldn't afford the cost, now they can sit from their home and then do. So I'm actually very positive. I think if you look at it 12 months, it's going to be tough. Most likely till next fall, we're not going to really see that hybrid that people talking about till next year, fall to 21. But post of that, I'm very positive that I think like it's going to be a great fresh start for this industry to do better. That can be done. We could do a lot better in the next 10 to 15 years. It was a great, I think, reset button for a lot of institutions to rethink how can we be innovative, how can we put students' experience first, and how we can give the best in any scenario. So I think schools are ready for even the worst after this. So.
Great. This is great to finish on an optimistic note there, Mehdi. Thank you very much.